Hotel India. I am Sai Krishna and I've chosen the topic Hotel Alpha Mike Radio. Welcome to the Shack. Coined from the names of three eminent scientists, Hertz, Armstrong, and Marconi, the ham radio has quite a bit of history to it. Although these days hams is referred to the radio operators that use ham radio or amateur radio. This is a non commercial licensed radio service enabling radio enthusiasts to provide emergency communications, improve their technical skills, and enhance international ham connections, friendship, and well being beyond the borders. So, ham radio really began in 1927, and that was when the Radio Act was put into place. And at that time, the US government decided to allocate a certain amount of the radio spectrum band to the amateur radio operators. Similar to the broadcast radio stations, each ham operator was required to have a call sign, example W2AEW or YZ1KR. So if you were one of them, you'd find an open frequency which nobody was using, and you'd send out a message CQ, what's considered to be for a general call to any station to figure out if anybody is there on the other end. And then you'd have to wait for a response, and then you'd start your peer to peer communication. Also, after a successful communication with another ham operator, it's proper etiquette to exchange addresses and to send a specific type of postcards known as a QSL card. So this card would have um, your call sign and various information like your country and so on. And the equipment in those pictures in the previous slide all belong to one man, Hamid Demisovich. Cool, right? He had Ham in his name. So he was active in Los Angeles for nine in the 1920s to 1990s. His story is really inspirational because he migrates from the Eastern Europe to the US in 1920s, and he only wants to do two things, one of which is to gain a US citizenship, and next, most importantly, is to get his ham operator's license. This is his record of all the kinds of people he communicated with from his station back in Los Angeles. If you'd observe, there'd be four CQs with remarks no one answered, as in that frequency band, no one was there to reply for his CQ message that he sent. Otherwise, there are other remarks with the the location name where the person is. Oh, look, there are a few LAs, same place where his station was. So this it could either be a person or it could be a station with the call sign. So in a way, it was like traveling all around the world using just a radio. So today, this is used in crisis situation, hobbies. So the question arises as so the question arises as to how to get a ham radio license. There are a few requisites that you need to have. Like you need to be about 12 years of age and appear for the ASOC examination, which is Amateur Radio Station Operators Certificate Examination, and which is held by the DOT, which is the Department of Telecommunication under the Ministry of Communication India. The exam has two stages, each of which is consisting of two sections, and based on the performance you'd be given two grades of license, either grade 1 or grade 2 license, based on the cutoffs which are set. And the licenses consist of either general or restricted. General being the one where you need to know the Morse code, CW, and restricted you needn't, as long as you know phonetics, it's okay. So in part 1 you have two sections. One section A consists of basic electronics, thermonic valve, um, electrical stuff, radio theory, and etc. Section B will be pertinent to the rules and regulations which were set, national and international amateur radio regulations, and some of which are like the India WPC telegraph rules of 1973 and amateur service rules of 1978. Sample paper snippets have been put just to motivate, but all in all, this examination doesn't take time, but getting your license would take time, because after you write the examination and then evaluation, and then you have to wait for the police to arrive at your house and verify if you are there at the place where you are supposed to be, um, what you entered in your information place before writing the examination. So all in all, it should take about months to an year getting your ham radio license. So once you have that, then you're up and running to go on air and start transmitting at different frequency. Although you can still receive in various frequencies, you won't need for receiving, but for transmitting this is very much essential. hmm. So on to the right you see various frequency bands that are allotted to the restricted and general grade. Also the maximum DC input and voltages are given, and various modulation schemes with which you can transmit is also specified. Overall there are three various bands like the HF, VHF and UHF which are used, uh, but to communicate worldwide you would have to use HF because of ionospheric bouncing, so that you can communicate with people across the globe. I'll explain that later. Comes to ham radio communication, there are a few. Comes to ham radio communications, there are two broad modes. One is Morse code, and the other is is English or a language. But in the case of calling out your calls in, you would have to use phonetic alphabet just to be clear, reducing the ambiguity. Like for example, if you want to say W to AAW, you would have to say whiskey to echo whiskey, and in the case of Morse code you'd be requiring a switch, a keyer, a tapper, where you'd have to um, press for 1 unit of time when it comes to a dot, and for 3 when it comes to a dash. So if you have to say W to AW, you should go something like did da da, did da da da. There are a few codes and abbreviations which are in use, like the Q codes, which are three-letter codes which have a standard meaning, so that you can communicate a large um, information quickly. Standard information. So the hams can record a smaller set of information, a smaller segment of information, and then send it. It's useful during emergencies, crisis situations, etc. For example, QRA question mark would be what is the name of your station, and then QRA and then the name of your station. And when it comes to the CW abbreviations, they're pretty standard for establishing the communication as in the information communication after electronically establishing it. It would be like CQ, meaning a general call to any station. So you'll go like CQ and then your call sign, and then you'll have to await for a response. So like in the directory previously, you saw CQ and then remarks, as in there was nobody on the other side. So he would have CQ'd in the frequency band where nobody was there to reply. Question arises, there question arises, why use the ham radio? There are many applications of ham radio, like during crisis situations, disaster relief, search and rescue operations, and then ham contesting, sports, like Foxons, CQs, WWCW contests, DX contests, and a lot more. Like um, if you want to get information from the ISS, you could hook the ham radio with an Android app and get a live feed of whatever's going on the ISS. Now this is after locating where the ISS is. I mean, if the ISS is above you, and if it's in range, there are many ISS trackers which you can use for that. But all in all, this has a lot of applications. I'll go through this. The good things about ham radio and ham radio communication and ham radio networks are that it doesn't require you to have a pre-existing network nor power grids. Also, during crisis situations, disaster, where the usual communication nodes are either overloaded or are destroyed, ham radios, they come off use. Also, you have options to quickly send information onto the other side, as mentioned with the Q codes. Further, the setting up of ham radio or ham radio shack or ham radio communication isn't much at all, as you will also see in many ham radio sports where you're moving and just with antennas and watt meters. Also, so the setup time is quite less and the electronic requisites are quite less. Spare parts can be used to make ham radios and start running it. So even during this COVID situation, hams are quite active when it comes to sending food packages to the poor, to the people who are hungry. They're quite active. During disaster situations, they're quite active. They send drones uh, to places after receiving calls through ham radio that help is required. So basically, ham radio is quite useful when it comes to disaster relief, uh, search and rescue operations, etc. Another good thing is that it allows you to quickly be able to set up communications all around the world. Using ionospheric bouncing, the lower HF high frequency signals can be used to cover large distances. This is mainly due to the fact that they are of lower energy and the wavelength is so that they get reflected off of the ionospheric layers. If you ham radio, there are a few ham radio sports that exist around the world, like the fox hunts. I was able to gather information about the fox hunt that happened in Rochelle, 13th of April 2019, held by Radars. Now, this is a ham radio body which is supposed to draft rules, guidelines, if you may, stating the transmit frequency of the fox, the call sign of the fox, the some miles or kilometer radius around the location where the fox is hidden in. By the way, the fox is a transmitter. Um, it is best to keep it omni or unidirect, or as close to least directional as possible. um, Anyways, also the permissions so that people can enter the premises of where the fox is hidden in has to be taken, the official stuff which has to be done by any sports authority. Okay, so there are certain protocols of this sports, like for example, how is a fox going to transmit? So there are multiple transmissions that happens, right? Like the starting with first transmission ends with final, and then following which it's finally ending with contact with lost hounds, wherein it just shouts that yes, the fox is victorious, in case nobody ends up finding the fox. So these transmissions happen at various times. At various times, you have various durations in which the transmission happens, and at different power levels. So it starts off with high power and then it reduces. Starting off should be high because the people are far away and they need to find out in which direction the fox has transmitted, and starting 4 to 5 transmissions should be high so that um, the participants are able to hone on to the fox. So if you were to play a fox hunt, you would need to have a buddy who can either hold the antenna or hold the power meter. Um, you would have to have a directional antenna firstly, so that you can find out in which direction the transmission is coming from. Next, as the power peaks at that frequency, you'd say that yes, the direction of the fox is in that direction where the peak has happened. So you take your vehicle, you go elsewhere and do the same measurement. So now you have two places, two distinct points, and two distinct directions from those two distinct points. Now you can triangulate the fox based on these two places. Um, but depending upon the weather conditions and a lot of other factors like roads and all that, you might end up circling the fox multiple times because, well, in this case, since it was cloudy, they weren't able to directly hone into the fox. They ended up circling it twice, even after triangulating it. After all of this behavior on the map, they just lost hopes on the map once they came close to the fox. Oh yeah, and another thing, as you come closer to the fox, what happens is uh, the frequency in which you are measuring the power, um, because you're close, you will have a broader, uh, because I mean you'll be able to read sufficiently high power levels in a broader angular direction. So as you come close, your accuracy of spotting the fox reduces. So in that case, what you should be doing is to find out the power level on the harmonics, because as you come closer, the power level in the harmonics starts rising. Non-linearities maybe most main thing, non-linearities itself. So yeah, it's quite an interesting sport. And in the video which I saw, uh, you should also look out for some spillage or some indication that the activity of hiding the fox is disclosed, like throwing off some mud or some grass layer thrown away here and there just to hide the fox. So to other sports are like the CQWWCW sport, where you CQ and await response. The more the operator gets response to, as in if he can contact the most amounts of hams, then that operator wins basically. It's more the merrier kind of a sport. You don't really have to move a lot in this. You just have to establish a location and establish a good antenna equipment, the power, and if the weather conditions are good, you're all good to go. So uh, there are multiple ham blogs that exist online, uh, enlisting all the sports the hams have participated in. One of those hams was the PE3VP, and the contests which he participated in was PACC contest 2018, the IOTA contest, Textile and Grigishov. In the PACC contest, he was a part of a crew which consisted of 8 people, and in IOTA, 2 were there. The bad thing about IOTA was that the weather conditions were quite bad, but the overall score was good because of a sudden change, a good change in hunting the repeaters. Well, then coming to India, you have many ham radio sports, CQ sports, like the one which was held by ARSI in Tamil Nadu, um, at VHF 145.5 megahertz, and at HF 40 to 20 meters, um, which was also conducted this year, before COVID really got to us, at 29th to 1st 29th February to 1st March. And there's this other sport which was conducted, Hamfest India 2013 in Gwalior. Now there are so many sports, so many CQ contests that happens. So this ham contesting is something that happens a lot, quite a lot. It's really fun. So you, once you're tuned at that frequency, you first CQ, you tell your name using phonetics, like if it was PE3V, then you'd have to say Papa Echo 3 Victor, and then await for response. Like for example, in certain videos it was like Bravo 17, which basically says one transmitter, high power wattage like 150 watts. So then you'd have to make a note of that. So finally, whoever gets the most amount of connections wins. It's again quite an active radio, ham radio active sport. It's fun. So to set up a communication link with a satellite, you need a couple of things. One would be a dual band radio, which is able to put out a tone squelch. Another form of selective calling, which is used to solve interference problems, to reduce the annoyance of listening to other users on a shared two-way radio communications call, like especially when it comes to the ISS uh, communication, in which case you require another app to downlink the data and then to view it via the app in a more human viewable way about what's going on board the ISS. Well, in such situations, there'll be a lot of people shouting at the same band of frequencies. So, an example would be the an FP F8HP, which is rated at 8 watts, but usually it would be like 4 to 5 watts, which is quite lower. Once that's there, you'll need to pre-program the radio so that you can later tune up and down from that frequency. So you'll have to consider the Doppler shifts that is associated with the satellites. So the next item in the list, which is also the most interchangeable option on the list, which are the antennas. So ordinarily your radio would be shipped with a standard rubber ducky. It's not entirely impossible that it works with satellites, but because um, it's possible, but it's quite hard. So if you want to upgrade anything in order to do satellite communication, so at least you'll need to upgrade the antenna to like the 1/4, the lambda by fourth monopole. Examples would be like the generic Nagoya antenna, and that is an omnidirectional antenna at that given frequency. So then, as the satellite comes overhead, you want to aim the antenna at the horizon, so that uh, because of the omnidirectionality, you'd be receiving at the side, at the along the length. So the fields would be coupled lengthwise. And the next option would be pretty much the standard Yagi antenna. Examples would be like the Arrow 2 antenna. So even if the satellite pass goes bad, you'd still be receiving quite well. Also, these specific categories of satellites are called the AMSATs. Also, the Yagi antennas are basically like the dipoles with directors and reflectors. The Arrow 2 comes with a duplexer, but if you have only one radio to use with it at the moment, well, because the Arrow 2 has uh, two different elements which are orthogonally placed, the 2 meter and then the 70 centimeters. So if your satellite is transmitting in one of those frequencies and your radio is tuned to one of those frequencies, but because of the fact that you have a duplexer but only one radio to receive at, well, so then with just one radio, if you're just transmitting, you won't be able to hear yourself in this case, half duplexing. And then one of the next important thing that you're probably gonna want is a cell phone. But you can still do it this without a cell phone, but the cell phone has quite valuable apps, tools for satellite communication to ensuring that you're tracking satellites properly, like the ISS tracker, yeah, Android app which is available, sea times, elevation degree, more importantly a voice recording app. But if you don't have the cell phone, you'll want need a notebook handy so that you can write down all the call signs and the QSOs. So basically you need to give yourself room for error, so best you have a book and a mobile phone, because these satellite passes don't really happen all that often. On top of that, anything can go wrong. So the ISS tracker would be for the ISS, but generally for any satellite, and also for debris and other dead satellites out there in the graveyard orbit, you have this Heavens Above, an Android app. So, Heavens Above. So, you have an option to directly hit on the radio satellites button. That'll get your GPS location and then determine from the soonest to the days after for which what satellites are going to pass above your location. So you can use that to determine which satellites you're gonna use. So as an example, say you want to tap on the SL50. So this is an 24-hour format, but our SL50 pass would be from 427 and 1 second. Wait, this was the wrong satellite. Just a second. Yeah, 1 second. So you have, say, the prism. So its pass is going to be from 1233.19 to 1234.12 with elevation 10 degrees down 437.425. Okay. So down would mean the downlink frequency. So you'd have a sky chart saying what degree it's going to be when it passes over, and closer to the center it's easier, and as the line gets closer to the edges it's going to be the satellite's going to be closer to the horizon, and it would be quite hard for, yes, because the range is limited then. So you can see the rises, the azimuth, it's very important. So based on that you'll have to direct your antenna. So using a notebook you could put down the rise time, pass time, the azimuth angles, which way the satellite's gonna rise, and also the max elevation. And then the next app that you want to download is an azimuth app. So there's this app called Azimuth Compass. So this Heavens Above app is great for tracking a satellite, but it's not as always as accurate when it comes to shooting your azimuth or degrees. So you may want to have a separate app, or you can use a compass to shoot the azimuth. So if the satellite is coming up at 333 degrees, then you'll have to aim your compass at 333 degrees in the app. So then depending upon the directionality of your antenna, you'll have to aim it so that the major lobe is pointing towards this 333 degrees, the azimuth. The next step of app is the voice recorder. So you'll need a recorder to get to know what the call sign is, because it's already stressful trying to angle your antenna, trying to manage uh, other factors. So trying to write down the call sign during the pass, it's not practical. So leave the phone somewhere close to the radio so you can record the pass. So you can just concentrate upon getting the communication down pretty good. So when it comes to choosing a spot, you'll have to choose the spot so that the satellite tracker line is closest to the middle and you don't have any sources of interferences close by. So first you'll need to know what your grid square is, which is a way to determine your location from the place you're communicating from. Plus you need to talk in phonetic alphabet so that people know what you're saying. So you say your call sign, you say the grid line and the grid, and then they tell you their call sign and then their grid square. So starting just for trial, you could use your, in this case the arrow 2 antenna, and you can ask a friend of yours to transmit some signal from the direction of the azimuth direction that the satellite tracker has given. just to make sure that the communication is all good. So yeah, after waving around the antenna, the arrow to antenna, so at this time it's best to have a mobile or something to record the voice of the the people who have received your signal. So you'd go like um, your call sign and then your grid square, and then the receivers would send their call sign and then their grid square. You'll have to keep doing this multiple times, swinging the antenna here and there, and then figuring out if what was recorded in your mobile was indeed what's required, as in you can understand what's being sent and they can understand what's being sent. Might have to switch hands holding the antenna and stuff. So then if everything is done perfectly, then you'd be able to be in a conversation with the satellite. I mean, you'll be in a communication with the satellite. So also there are other cases where you can downlink digital data and feed it to some of the Android apps and then convert, basically decode it to human viewable form, which could be sound, songs, other messages, or live videos of some things that's happening on the satellite, on the, say, the space station. So this portion is also fun. The radio amateur The Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, or AMSAT, is a worldwide group of amateur radio operators (hams) which was formed in the District of Columbia in 1969 as an educational organization with goal to foster amateur radio's participation in space research and communication. AMSAT India has been quite active, building the AMSAT-1 and showing the capability to communicate with another satellite. As you see, the KISS frames show that the AMSAT-1 beacon had been successfully received by the Russia's R4 UAB. Also, the AHAN-1 IST satellite 1 is also a hamsat which communicates in 437 MHz ham band, downlinking AX25 packets to the IST ground station. AMSAT Moonbound. The Radio Amateur Satellite Moon bouncing, or EME, which is Earth Moon Earth Contact, is quite an interesting ham activity that goes on. You'd need an EME system for that. Example of a few people who have done that, they've used 10 gigahertz EME contact. The person Rex VK7MO had the EMA system. They had to contact OK2AQ in Czech Republic. So first you'd have to calibrate to the moon's direction using a tracker first. Well, you wouldn't really need a tracker because you can see the moon firstly, and then well, you would require it anyways. So the entire rig was like a tripod stand, a feed front dish, and a few more which I'll be explaining shortly. So firstly we have the IF system, the intermediate frequency system, which gives Earth lower frequency, lower power. Well, the signal through BNC will be fed to the transverter, which is mounted at the back of the dish. That only requires a small amount from the IF radio, and that up converts it up to 10 gigahertz. and then spews it to the dish, and then the dish sends it out. The GPS provides the GPS system. A GPS locker will provide a reference for the radio. It will lock the transmitter on the frequency as well, so it's accurate. So that they'll not be required to find each other with the Sedge Republic via ham manually. So first you'll have to calibrate a known location, the location whose directional coordinates are quite well known. Like say there's something which is exactly to 220 degrees. So in the calibration you also have this gun scope uh, to accurately uh, and fine adjust the entire system to the calibrated calibrated target. Now the gun scope is calibrated so that it's pointing where the dish is pointing. It's quite well done. So first you'll have to point to the moon, and then you'll have to be at the right frequency, and then everything else follows. So even with the GPS frequency locker, you'd still be ending up with 1 or 2 hertz on 10 gigahertz. And then also with the Doppler shift, because of the relative motion between Earth and Moon, there might be again shifts in frequency. And then the software WSJT, what that does is to consider that Doppler shift and then make the required corrections. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the other fellow on the waterfall graph. So the tools would be like the 9700 radio itself. First, you'll have to check if the frequency is locked, and then the power should be like 1 watt. So first, the WSJT tracks the Doppler on the moon, maintaining a constant frequency on the moon, and then resets the required frequency to match the thing. Now, the internal sound card in the IF allows you to view the waterfall graph. Sound through the waterfall graph. Shucks. The sound which is on the waterfall graph on the WSJT software. You'll have to decode that afterwards. It's already done by the sound card in that IF. So yes. So seeming in the preamplifier uses instead of an SMA connector, the WR95 waveguide. Well, this is the nitty-gritty of what was happening. Just thought it was important. So instead of having a relay to switch from transmit to receive, it's a waveguide switch, like a duplexer. And the whole arrangement is like a 60 watt amplifier for 10 gigs. So out of the transmitter you have 2 watts, and out of the amplifier you have 60 watts. And then there's a sequencer, the safety interlocking through the contacts in the waveguide switch itself. So when that's activated, when it goes to the transmit position, this is a set of contacts closed. So they're utilized to make sure that the power can be only applied to the PA, with the waveguide switch is in the transmit position. And then on the front panel you have ammeters and various gauges and fuses, and then there's also the inclinometer, which is kept so that you can make sure that the elevation is correct to the moon on the dish, and another inclinometer for the calibration of vertical polarization in case you're turning the entire dish by 90 degrees anti-clockwise, as seen from the back of the dish. Plus you have the heat sinks close to the amplifier part because of a lot of heat, 60 watts, right? So they were now trying the contact with OK to AQ. So as one of the parties start receiving, the one that's having problem in the reception, they'll have to keep moving reorienting the dish as the moon starts to set. So yeah, one of the parties that were was that isn't able to receive after doing the reorientation needs to wait for the signal, and then they'll have to decode that. So the and then based on the time gap between sending and reception, you can either say if it was direct communication or it was a bounce off from the moon. 2.5 seconds was what they got. Also, it's really important to not stand in front of the dish, which gives 60 watts of power, especially at 10 gigs. So, well, at the end, they didn't get a decode at uh, minus 23. So this was one of the tests if the X-band 10 gigahertz was feasible for moon bouncing. And well, there are a few there are a few features you'd want to have on a handheld ham radio set. Okay, like the female SMA connector. Well, usually it's an SMA connector is used in this case to connect to the rubber ducky. Thing is, it's better to have a female rather than a male connector because you'll be having one ham radio set and to which you'll be attaching multiple uh, rubber duckies or other antennas. Thing is, um, it's better to have a female one because the central connector in the male might in the long run face physical damage, so it's better to have a female rather than a male as semiconductor, so as it's easier to replace an antenna too. It's and next feature would be it would be better to have a tri-band radio which has 2 meter 220 and 220 megahertz and 70 centimeters. There are not many people using the 220 megahertz, so mainly because not many radio manufacturers make it, uh, but it's better to use it as well because you'll have less traffic and stuff. For example, the Baofeng, it's a company whose ham radios have they make the 220 megahertz as well. Some of the examples are the ASUFT, 2D RAR, and the Kenwood D74A. Okay, the next feature would be waterproof. So that in case you're using the radio when the weather is really bad, like it's raining or something, especially in Kerala or Bangalore where it happens a lot, it's best to have waterproofing. Waterproofing at high power. There's this company, Radio Oddity, which makes this DMR radio, which is again waterproof. Some other examples are the Yaesu making the VX6 submersible waterproof again. Another major feature is the long battery life. Well, popular choices are like Aliens and BTEC. Also, there's this Radiority, which a company which also manufactures radio for the next feature, where you can also start to charge the radio using a USB cable. So that would be quite good, quite handy when you have just a laptop and a radio, and you have maybe a power bank and you go around with that, or in case maybe also have a solar panel or something, and yeah, a USB power. That would be cool. Next feature would be to have a really good automatic packet reporting system, APRS. And the good thing about that is that you take your location information and put it online. Now, so in case you're in any trouble, uh, this it won't be hard for the search and rescue team to to come to your aid. Yes, so for the whole entire trip, your status can be sent basically. So say you're rock climbing, or say you're going on a trek, or say you're on an expedition or something, and then your usual gadget, the mobile phone, cannot really do any communication uh, at those places because it's really hard. So at this point, you can use them. Also, text messages and basically weather report. Basically, it's like a one-way beaconing. So a few popular options for this are the uh, ESO FT3D, and then you have the Kenwood TMD74. These are quite useful. And the next feature would be to have a squelch knob that's explicitly physically present on the radio instead of you going to the menu and then navigating all the way to the squelch setting and then doing the squelch. It's better to have a physical one rather than uh, software in the radio itself, so that's always good. ESO FT60 is one of those cool popular ones. Used to be there, but recently they've not been using them a lot, so it's best to be there again, like the old days. Yes, the feature is the high contrast display. So, in case it's sunny and too bright weather outside, or in case it's too dark, it's better if you have a high contrast display so that you can easily make out what you want to make out of the stuff that you see. So, it's clear. Popular options ESO FT3D again, and Anytone. Anytone, what's that? Not sure which model that is. Anytone. Yes, Anytone 787 Plus. So dark background and bright colors is what we want. Okay, the next feature really important is the wideband receive AM and SSB. Quick popular ones, ESO FT60 again, and then Kenwood TMD74. So you won't really want to have another shortwave radio which you gotta be carrying around with you. So this would be a good option to have. You can have multiple things at the same radio itself. Okay, another feature is the one digital mode. This one is going to increase the cost, but it's worth it. FT3 ESO System Fusion Alliance HD1 with a DMR, then the DMR ID51. Okay, so the other feature is an easy to use CPS, a computer programming software. So some of the softwares are Chirp. It's a pretty multi OS runable software. Mac, Windows, or Linux, and can be used on a wide platform of radios. Plus, it's free, open source. So, say for example, you're using a ham radio and just say it's integrated on the Raspberry Pi itself. So you can have the software running on Raspberry. You can do alterations on Raspberry itself. So because it's using Linux, so it is a good option to have an easy to use CPS running on multiple radios, running on multiple OSs. Chirp is a really good option. Use location, frequency, name, tone mode, tone squelch, DTCS code, DTCS pole, duplex, etc. Base station transceiver is a base station transceiver is a permanent station in a building. More power, easier to use, and more facility, like the D4 ground station lab. Like the 9700, the IC 9700 VHF 1200 megahertz base station SDR transceiver, was uh, which was talked about in the moon bouncing thing. That is also a base station transceiver. Mobile transceivers and a permanent station in a vehicle. Again, more power, but the ST antenna doesn't work well inside a metal car because of Faraday effect. So usually the antenna goes above the car, outside. In case of heavy traffic cities like say in Bangalore, you could use that to tune into the traffic police band, so you can always hear at what in what junctions of your um, of the roads there is more traffic, and basically what is the status of traffic at various places, so that you can avoid them and reduce time in case you have a private vehicle and decide to move with that. So it would be good for that such a purpose. Repeaters, they help extend the range of VHF and UHF handheld and mobile transceivers. They're usually located on high points like mountains where there is a big obstacle between either side. Then tall buildings or satellites to automatically relay signals from one side to another, one point to another. So also some of them have connections to the telephone system or the internet. The thing is, they receive and transmit on different frequencies, usually in VHF and UHF bands only, and not HF, because if you have a HF, then you already have a really uh, long range of coverage. So for small radios, for low output power, uh, such a architecture would be good.